This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
I want to spend some time talking about Aharon. And this week's Parashat tells us that Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, were killed by a fire by Kadosh Baruch Hu. And Aaron's reaction was Vayidom Aharon. The Aharon remained silent. So in highlighting the point of Aaron being silent, that there's really four types of categories, four gradations of objects that exist in the world. The first and the highest and the most elevated is, of course, a chai that's medaber, which means a live human being that's capable of communicating, capable of speech, and that's the highest level of the creation that exists. That's really the pinnacle of creation, was the creation of man. And as it is known, when a person communicates, a person could be offended, could be harmed, and the natural reaction to such a thing would be to fight back, to respond back, to be defensive, to defend oneself. And that is the typical response of a chai, that's medaber. Then you have the category of a chai, that's just a living being, but doesn't have that ability to communicate in the form of speech like we do. And that's the animal life, and the different types of species, and all the other things that associate with that. And those are called chai, because if they were to be attacked, or they were to be aggressed against, then they would also defensively fight back. As we know, if you try to take a cub away from a bear, then that bear will not be too happy, will respond aggressively in response to saving its own children or itself from an attack. So that's the chai. How about the tzomeach? The tzomeach is the plantation, the vegetation, the trees that live. If a tree is harmed, it won't respond, it won't fight back, doesn't have that capability, but it will be recognizable. There will be some sort of effect. So if you cut the tree, then you could tell that it's been cut, even if it wasn't fully cut. Or if you stepped on the grass, then the grass looks different, it looks stepped upon. However, there's the one final element, the bottom of the barrel, as you would say, the inanimate objects, the objects that are not living, they're not breathing, they're not functioning, they're just there, like stones, rocks, sand, water. You can't recognize anything that was to happen to them. It would be unrecognizable. If you step on the rock doesn't change. If you throw dirt, the dirt will still be, those particles will still be the same exact particles. And that's the domim. The domim aspect of the world is the aspect of the inanimate. And what Aaron was able to do, he was able to take his level of chai medaber, of being a human being that feels emotions, that feels different feelings and desires, and yet he was able to harness it at the most difficult time, at the most emotionally draining possible time that a person can have in his life. And Aaron was vayidom. He was able to transfer his emotion to that of a domem, which means that it was unrecognizable. It did not have a negative effect on his trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the least bit. It didn't even make a dent in Aharon's emunah, in his faith and in his trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's something that was unique and special to Aaron, and that capability, that vaidom, that silence, that dimama, was so deep and so meaningful and true to who Aaron was, that the Torah records it for generations as a praise to Aaron. And we look, and I think it's quite apropos that we find during today, that was considered the Yom HaShoah, the day of remembering the Holocaust. And we know that there is a comparison between the deaths of tzaddikim to the destruction of the world. In the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the seriousness of even one tzaddik is like losing an entirety of a world. The loss of Nadav and Avihu was something that was the equivalent of losing a whole generation. That was the seriousness in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Midrash tells us that even though the day, Bayom Shemini, the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, was a day of tremendous celebration. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says that he didn't have a happiness before him since that time, from the time of Maaseh Bereshit, from the creation of heaven and earth. To HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this was the most important event that had existed historically from that point and before of history. So it was a special, special moment. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that the moment was significantly dampened, and it was basically tainted by the death of these two tzaddikim, these two righteous men. And that was, as the Midrash says, Yivku et sherefa asher saraf Hashem, that is in reference to Nadav Avihu, that the fire, the burning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu burnt is to be mourned throughout Am Yisrael, which is in comparison to the Beit HaMikdash, and the deaths of tzaddikim, which is akin to the destruction of Beit HaMikdash. So the seriousness of the matter. But there's also another lesson that's really imparted, that Moshe Rabbeinu spends 7 days in building, constructing, and deconstructing the Mishkan. He builds it the first day, he takes it apart. Builds it the second day, takes it apart. Until Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he keeps taking it apart and rebuilding the Mishkan. The 8th day comes and Moshe Rabbeinu builds it one final time, and it does not go ahead and does not get destroyed. And this number 7 is a very important number. We find also, it says, Sheva yipol tzadik vekam, that a person who's righteous may fall 7 times, will fall 7 times. But he's a tzaddik because he gets up. As the Pasuk tells us that Hema kareu v'nafalu, talks about the nations of the world. They bend over and fall. Va'anachnu kamnu v'nitodad, and we rise up and strengthen ourselves and regroup and regather our energy. And I would have said that that's not how it's supposed to be written. They fall down and we stay up. We don't fall. That would have been the correct way. That's not what it says. It says, Hema kareu v'nafalu, they fall, va'anachnu kamnu v'nitodad, and we rise up, which means that we also fell, and we rose up. The difference between Am Yisrael and everyone else is when we suffer tragedy, we go ahead and we don't focus on the tragedy. We focus on rebuilding, on recreating, making something better, learning the lessons of the past and applying it and redeeming ourselves and making ourselves even 5 times stronger than we were. And that's really the lesson of the Holocaust. That Am Yisrael, after suffering grueling, terrible suffering that is unimaginable and undescribable in any way, shape, or form, but we see, looking in hindsight, that not just the fact that we were able to survive, but the years following the Holocaust until this very day, we thrived. We continue to exponentially grow as a nation and be successful as a nation, and we did not let the terrible tragedy and calamity of the Holocaust to get to us. And the opposite, it reinforced us, it motivated us to do better and to try harder and to make sure that we multiply in a way that Am Yisrael will continue that success that we have endured since the times of the Holocaust. And that's something that is to the credit of Am Yisrael, with all the problems and the difficulties that we do have. But we have that to say, that we just don't give up. We might fail once, we might fail twice, but we will rise and we will succeed in accomplishing what needs to be accomplished. And the death of Nadav Avihu is something that requires us to investigate and look further into and understand truly what their sin was, and maybe glean a few lessons from it and a better understanding. Because we have to really, realize that Midrash that talks about different rabbis came in and they said different explanations what happened with Nadav Avihu. So basically, the simple explanation was the Pasuk says that they brought a foreign fire into the area that they were not allowed to be in, Kodesh HaKodashim, and they brought the Ketoret, Ish Zara Asher Otziva Hashem. They brought the spices onto the Mizbeach, they put a fire on the Mizbeach, they weren't allowed to do that, and immediately they were consumed by the fire. That's what is implied in the Pasuk. But then the Midrashim tell us that it wasn't just that, it was the fact that they were shtuye yain, as the expression is, that they were intoxicated to some level. They drank a little bit of wine before they went ahead and they worked in the Mishkan, which was not allowed to be done. And another explanation, the Gemara says that they were held to task because they were unwilling to get married with anybody. They said that we are the sons of Aharon, our uncle is the leader of Am Yisrael, is the king of Am Yisrael. How could we go ahead and marry a simpleton, a regular woman? We need something special, and they would not get married. That's another explanation of what exactly the sin was. And there are a few other explanations, various ideas brought down in the Midrash. And really, every single one of these explanations we need to delve into and understand what exactly does that mean. Because when you talk about Nadav Avihu, they brought a foreign fire, they drank wine before they entered the Mishkan. All these things, they sound so bizarre for such tzaddikim, for such righteous men. And when we understand how righteous they were actually, it even makes it a more difficult case to understand what exactly their sin was. Because it mentions that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went to Har Sinai the first time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him to take the Jews out of Egypt, Moshe Rabbeinu refused. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one of the things he mentioned is that the sign for you will be that we will worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu upon this mountain after we leave Mitzrayim. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him that something will happen, v'nikdash bichvodi, in the establishment of a unique event, there will be a sanctification of my name. And Moshe Rabbeinu had this nevuah, he had this belief, and he knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to take his closest person, his closest people, on a very special day. Moshe turns to Aharon and he said that when I was building the Mishkan, day 1, day 2, day 3, I was extremely nervous because I thought HaKadosh Baruch Hu was referring to me and referring to you, saying it to his brother Aharon. That we are, who could be closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than Moshe and Aaron? Moshe gets the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu is there 40 days, 40 nights, fighting off angels, learning Torah from the greatest Rabbi of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How can you get closer than that? And Aharon was no less than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe and Aaron b'choanav. Moshe and Aaron were equal. Sometimes it mentions Aaron before Moshe, sometimes Moshe before Aaron, to tell you that they were equal in their status. So I thought it was in reference to me and you. And then I saw that Nadav and Avihu were the ones that perished, and I see that they are even closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than we are. And I was mistaken in assuming that it would be us, because they were the Kiddushim, they were the Kovim, the closest of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is an unbelievable lesson. That's who Nadav and Avihu were. They were greater than Moshe and Aaron. And the Torah writes, the Torah tells us that when they went up to Har Sinai, it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe, you, Aharon, Nadav v'Avihu, v'shiv'im ziknei Yisrael. That you should go up, Aaron should go up, and Aaron's two sons, Nadav v'Avihu, are spelled out by name. Not Elazar v'Itamar, they're not spelled out by name. And the Shivim Zekinim are not. They're all listed in one category. And the Zohar writes, and the Gemara writes as well, that is coming to teach you that Nadav v'Avihu were the equivalent of the entirety of the Sanhedrin. Their greatness, their stature was that of equivalence to the Sanhedrin, which is an unbelievable power that they had. And that just really exacerbates the question. Such great people could do something like this. It's contrary to logic. It's contrary to basic understanding. And it gets worse, because when we look at the holiest day of the year, which is Yom Kippurim, the most awesome day and spiritual day in the Jewish year, where everybody is mimicking that of the angels. We dress in white, we say the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, like the angels were to say it out loud, and we conduct ourselves in a very lofty way. And the reading of Yom Kippurim is Parashat Acharei Mot, which talks about, the first pasuk discusses, the death of Nadav v'Avihu, Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aaron. And the Zohar says that's not for no reason. There is actually importance to reading about the sons of Aaron during this time. And the Zohar says that a person who reads about the death of tzaddikim, and specifically the death of Nadav v'Avihu, and he mourns the death of these great individuals, at this time, at Yom Kippurim, there is a clear connection between achieving forgiveness and praying and using the sorrow and the bitterness of the loss of the tzaddikim to our benefit. That is why it's written right before the Torah talks about the avodah of Yom Kippurim, the different labors that the Kohen HaGadol is supposed to perform, because that's what it's coming to tell you. It's coming to teach you that the praying and the mourning of a tzaddik is, if a person takes it to heart, has the capability of erasing the entirety of a person's averot. And it's read because of that on Yom Kippurim. And if you think about that, and you say to yourself, it doesn't really make too much sense, because why should that action, the sin of Nadav va'Avihu, that moment where they made a mistake, they made an error, should be so focused on and praised in the eyes of the Torah that should be the reading of Yom Kippurim? I mean, that would be akin to saying, like, we should read about Korach on Yom Kippurim. At the end of the day, even if they were very righteous, that action was an action of sin. When they entered the Mishkan, they did something that was a mistake, that was wrong. Why should we be focused on that so much so and say their death should be a kapara, should be an atonement for us, and it's able for generations to forgive for all our sins? It was a sin what they did. And shouldn't it be something that we shouldn't focus on, something that should take away from their greatness, not, so to speak, glean it as their greatness? And it forces you to realize that their sin wasn't something that we really understand on a simple level. It must be something far deeper than the basic understanding that we might have to it. Otherwise, why would the Torah praise it? Why would the Torah want us to read about this on Yom Kippurim? And it gets worse, really, because the Midrash tells us that Nadav va'Avihu, they would walk after Moshe and Aaron. Whenever there was a procession or some sort of place they would have to go, then it would be Moshe, Aaron, and followed by Nadav va'Avihu. And Nadav would turn to Avihu, and he would say to his brother, when will these two zikenim, when will these old men already perish from the world, so we could take over the leadership? And the Midrash says it in those words. I mean, I'm just translating it to English, but it's basically in those exact words. When will these old men perish, so we could take over the reins of leadership? And you say to yourself, the most base politician today, the Havdir, Elef Alfei Avdalot, the most vile politician you would have would never say such a thing about his enemies. When will they die? He'll be politically excommunicated. It would be like a terrible thing to say. Everybody understands that intuitively. It's an immoral thing to do. And Nadav and Avihu are so openly and freely talking to each other about getting rid of Moshe Aaron so they could go ahead and become people of power, so they could become the leaders of Am Yisrael. It's counterintuitive to these great individuals to think in such a fashion and to say such a thing, which is far beyond just thinking it, to be able to utter those words. How could you understand that? How do you make sense out of that? Another question that one has to entertain is, according to that opinion that they were shtuyei yain, they drank wine before they entered, was it prohibited? Was it prohibited? It wasn't. You know when the Torah talks about the prohibition of drinking wine before you work in Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan? After. Once Nadav va'Avihu perished, then it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Aharon, and he told Aharon, Yain v'shechar altesh. You can't drink wine before you do the avodah, before you do the work of Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that means that before it wasn't asur. It wasn't prohibited. So what exactly did they do wrong? They didn't violate any precepts of halacha. They didn't violate drinking before. And plus, they didn't get drunk. It doesn't say that they were shikorim. It says they were shtuyei yain. The expression of shtot yain means that they drank a cup. They did a lechaim before they entered the Mishkan. Okay, but it wasn't prohibited. There was nothing asur about it. So what exactly are they held to task for? That question is not a question of my own. That's a question of the Rosh. The Rosh in his Tshuvot asks this question: how can you go ahead and say that was their problem when it wasn't prohibited until afterwards? And by the way, that's the whole way we know that was their sin. Because the Gemara points out, how did we discover that it's the fact they didn't drink? Because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Aaron to not drink wine, then that must, right after the death of Nadav and Avihu, it must be that was the problem, that was their flaw. But it's backwards, because there was no command at that point in time. So how do you reconcile that? How do you explain that as well? The Ya'arot Dvash has a beautiful, Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz quotes a Gemara to explain these problems and to fully understand what exactly was going on with Nadav and Avihu. And he says, based on a Gemara by Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, the Gemara there talks about a few stories. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana was walking in the desert, and there was a Yishmaeli, an Arab, that was traveling with him at that junction that he was located. And the Gemara makes a point to mention that this Arab was an expert in deserts. Like, the Gemara says he would smell the sand and he would tell you how far this city is. Or he would tell you how close you are to a body of water. And it even says that Rabbi Bar Bar Chana tested him. They walked a little bit, he asked him, how far are we from water? He told them, 8 parsaot, let's just say 8 miles. And then they walked a little bit further, and he said, now how much? And he told them 4 miles. And then he tried to switch the sand. He took some of the old sand and brought it to him and said, how close are we now? And he wasn't able to trick him. The guy wasn't stumped. He realized, no, this doesn't make sense. We're getting closer, and you're bringing me fake sand. He totally understood. He was an expert in everything about the desert. And this man asks Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, if he wants to see the people that perished in the desert in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu during those 40 years, all of Am Yisrael that died in the desert, do you want to see them? And Rabbi Bar Chana agreed. He took him to a location. It was not disclosed. That will remain a secret. But he took him to a location and he showed him the deceased. But it says that Rabbi Bar Chana, when he saw them, he saw individuals that were lying down on their back. The Gemara stresses this point. They were lying down on their back, and they looked like they were drunk. They looked, the Gemara used the expression, shtuyei yain, that they drank, and their faces looked very happy and mellow and relaxed and a little drunk. And Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz points out, who cares? I mean, what is the Gemara trying to say over here? They were lying on their backs, and all the Mitem Midbar are there, and they drank wine, and what's going on? So the Ya'arot Dvash gives a nice explanation in understanding this and what the Gemara is trying to tell us. And he gets into a pasuk. The pasuk talks about in future times, in the times of Mashiach, in the times that the world will understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence and will know about the whole picture, the grand scheme of things. Everything will become very apparent and clear. A person will not die on account of the sins of his predecessors. Rather, he will die on account of his own sins. And that's a blatant contradiction, because first of all, what it means is he won't die upon the sins of his forefathers. That means that the sin of Adam HaRishon won't affect him. But the question is, why would he die on account of any sin? It's the future times. The future times everybody knows. Everybody understands that Kadosh Baruch Hu exists. The Yetzer Hara has been killed. V'shachteh lemalach hamavet. The Yetzer Hara is gone. Why would anybody sin? Why would anybody have to die on account of their own sin? It doesn't make sense. You're talking about in future times. And the Ya'arot Dvash adds a further question that we could ask on the Malachim. We know there's a concept, the Torah stresses many times, angels. There's angels in the world. There's angels in the heavens. Sometimes they come down to earth. But those angels, people have this conception that they're like robots. They just go, walk, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands, okay, fulfill the command, do it. But it's not true. That's not what happens. We found different chazal, different times, the Gemara instances, the Gemara tells us that angels were punished. Now, you can't really be punished if you're a robot and you do exactly as you were told. That doesn't make sense. There must be some level of choosing between right and wrong. And we find this in several instances. Like it says, the Gemara talks about Acher in Masechet Chagiga. It says that when Rabbi Akiva took the 4 people, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher and Rabbi Akiva all went up to the heavens. And it says that Rabbi Akiva warned all the people, because Rabbi Akiva was an expert on these things, and he told them, be careful, when you enter the heavens and you will see this marble, bluish, crystal type thing, even though it might appear like water, don't call it water. Don't say mayim mayim, because that would be a lie, and they'll kick you out of the shamayim because you can't have a lie in heavens. So Rabbi Akiva was familiar, warned them. And the Gemara explains that Ben Azai, who was not married at the time, he went ahead and he gazed at HaKadosh Baruch Hu for too much, and he died, perished. Ben Zoma also gazed inappropriately at the Shekhinah, at the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he became crazy. He became insane, and he wasn't himself ever again. And then it said that Acher, who was Elisha ben Avuya at the time, one of the great Tanaim, he went ahead and he also glanced too much, and he went and rebelled. He was Mekatzitz ben Itiot, which means that he started cutting down the forest. Meaning, he started worshipping Avodah Zarah, he started rebelling against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that was the beginning of the end of this great Tana Acher. And Rabbi Akiva was the only one that was Nichnas b'Shalom ve'yatza b'Shalom. He entered peacefully, exited peacefully, because he was careful to see what he saw and to not see what he wasn't capable of viewing. That was Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara explains what happened with Acher. What did he notice? What did he see that made him pervert his understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He looked at the Kisei HaKavod, the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he saw that there was an angel there. The Gemara labels him Mitatron. And this angel was writing down the merits of Am Yisrael at that point in time. And Elisha ben Avuya understood, in his understanding, no one is allowed to sit in the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the throne of Shamayim, and there is no yeshiva, it shouldn't be allowed. And therefore, he said, how could it be that there's someone else sitting on this throne? Chas v'shalom, there's shtei reshuyot, there must be two jurisdictions, two powers that exist in the Shamayim, and that was the first point where he veered off the Yichud HaBorei Barach, the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his all-powerfulness, and he rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that was the beginning. It says that because of that, the Shamayim rejected Acher, because he had this mentality, and then Acher, once he saw he was rejected, he says, if I'm rejected from the next world, at least let me enjoy this world. And then he went ahead and he did terrible things in this world in order to pleasure himself, not caring about his Olam Haba, because he said, forget it, it's useless, there's no hope for me. Now, the Gemara there continues and says that what happened with Mitatron, in Shamayim they punished him. They said they started whipping him with 60 whips of fire, the Gemara says. And why did they whip him? Because he should have gotten up. He should have realized that maybe some misconception, something could happen, and therefore he should have stood up. The fact that he didn't stand up, he was punished. Now he's an angel, and he's being punished for doing something wrong. That shows you that there is this concept of mistakes by angels. Another Gemara, the Gemara talks about Gavriel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu came first to the angel Michael. Michael is Sar Yisrael, he is the angel of Am Yisrael, and he says to Michael, your nation has sinned. Your nation needs to be destroyed. This is the time of the destruction of first Beit HaMikdash. So Michael says, you should save Am Yisrael for the tzaddikim, bizchut, in the merit of tzaddikim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said back to Michael, not only am I going to burn the Reshaim, I'm going to burn the tzaddikim together with them. The righteous and the non-righteous will burn together. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Michael. Michael, gzera, that's it, it's a decree. What is he going to do? There's nothing he could do. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Gavriel to take the coals from the Shamayim, from a certain area, and to throw it on Yerushalayim. Gavriel, instead of taking it from where the fire was located, he took it from a second hand, from the Keruvim, the Gemara says. And since he took it from the second hand, it had time in the interim to cool down, because it's a Kli Sheni already. So it already cooled down, and by the time Gavriel got to it and threw it in Yerushalayim, it caused and wreaked a lot less havoc than would have been if he would have taken it directly. And in a certain sense, he saved Am Yisrael. But in Shamayim, they weren't happy. He didn't follow the orders of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was upset. He gave Gavriel, it says 60 lashes in Shamayim with a pursa denua, with a whip of fire. Again, you find this concept that the Malachim veer off from what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them to do. And you say to yourself, well, now we have really three problems, because we have these two Gemarot that say that the angels are able to choose between right and wrong, and sometimes they make mistakes. And then we have the Gemara that says that a person, even in future times when there's not going to be a Yetzer Hara, he will die on account of his own sins, which means that there will be an element of sin in future times. How could that be? an element of sin? So all these questions are a very connecting to one another. And the basic idea that Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz presents is he says that there's two types of sins. In the world that we live in, there's two types of sins. One type is the instincts and the natures of the Yetzer Hara that was built into the person, the evil inclination. A person seeks honor. A person seeks wealth, materialism. A person seeks glory, respect. A person has arrogance. And those types of sins that pull him, jealousy, to do things that are wrong. So that's the nature of a person. A person sins, and that's the whole point of this world, is to conquer those sins and to not commit those sins. Okay, that won't exist in the future. There's not going to be a Yetzer Hara to that extent that a person will desire to do things that are evil at the expense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That does not exist by angels either. They don't have these feelings, these emotions, these kavod, this honor, or desire for mundane physical pleasures. They don't have that. It doesn't apply to them. They can't choose between right and wrong on that front, on that realm. But there's a second component. There's the sin of angels, as Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz calls it, the sin of angels. And what is that? That's the element that we need to inspect a little further. How could angels sin? He explains that there is one element that could get an angel. And that is, when you talk about closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person has to reach levels of greatness step by step. He has to work on it. It's a process. You can't jump from point A to point C. You have to go through point B. You have to take the necessary steps. And sometimes, because of the great desire and the great closeness that one seeks with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's tempting to just go for the gold. To just forget the steps. I just want to reach for the ultimate good, the ultimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is the sin that applies to angels. That is something that applies and is a test for even the angels. Because they seek nothing more than ultimate and total, absolute closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's a strong temptation for them to reach levels that they're not permitted to go, or that they're not there yet to attain. And therefore the angels can also make mistakes. They could also err. This is, by the way, according to the Arot Dvash and according to other opinions, the sin of Adam HaRishon. Adam HaRishon wanted to jump, to become close with HaKadosh Baruch Hu after a snap of a finger. That's how he wanted to do it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished Adam because it wasn't the time. You seek to get closer. You seek to develop this bond, but you did it without going the proper steps, without the way to do it, without the process, and you cannot go ahead and do that. That was the mistake of many times we find this error. By Korach, if you think about the whole story of Korach, it makes zero sense. Let's put Korach aside. He went with 250 people of the Sanhedrin, 250 of the greatest minds, the most righteous people in Am Yisrael. Go with Korach, side with Korach. Are they crazy? Do they not know who Moshe Rabbeinu is? He picks up his staff, the sea splits, he goes ahead and he makes these miracles. He's the HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts him to Har Sinai. What are you, crazy? Don't you know Moshe Rabbeinu tells you that you bring the Ketoret, you're going to die. Because it's either me or it's you. It's not going to be both of us. You hear that from Moshe Rabbeinu. You're willing to put your life on the line for what? For what? For your personal honor? As the wife of On Ben Peret says, you're not getting anything. Either Moshe Rabbeinu is your leader or Korach is your leader. And it's true, they didn't do it for personal reasons. They did it because we have an opportunity to get close with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's worth the risk of giving up our lives. If we have the opportunity to bring a Ketoret in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is something we're capable of doing. A closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe developing a different relationship, a closer relationship. It's worth risking our life for. It was because it's hard for us to grasp this and to think in these terms because sometimes we're far removed from these concepts. But the true tzaddikim desire nothing less than the ultimate kirvah. V'ani kirvat Elohim li tov, as David HaMelech says. There's nothing better than that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's nothing more tempting in the world that exists than than not going through that process and jumping straight. I want that ultimate connection right now. I don't want to have to wait for it. And that was a mistake Korach made. That was a mistake Adam made. Says the Yarot Dvash, that was a mistake that Nadav v'Avihu made. It wasn't that they were making an error. The Yetzer Hara was able to confuse them, to get them to do things improper. No, the opposite. Contrary to that, the Nadav v'Avihu, because of their closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of their relationship, they did something in haste to get even further, to advance themselves. And that was the error. That was where the mistake was located. They went ahead, as the Gemara says, the first time they encountered the Shekhinah was in Har Sinai. Vayochelu vayishtu. The Torah expresses the visioning of the Shekhinah as eating and drinking, as a food, and even says that the Sanhedrin went too far. They gazed too much, too long, and therefore they were also guilty. They were also held accountable because they tried to jump levels. When it comes to the Torah, you have to progress according to your level. You cannot jump. You cannot try to take in too much. Like Ben Azai, Ben Zoma. They tried to take in too much and they became crazy. Ben Azai went ahead and he connected too far with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Orach Chaim puts it, the mitah, the death of a tzaddik, is mitat neshika. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu kisses the tzaddik and his soul just departs from his body. What Nadav v'Avihu did is they came too close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu providing them with a mitat neshika at the right time, they came close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and their neshama was taken as a result of that. That was the element of their sin. If we understand this, we can understand what it means that they were shtuyei yain. We think that means literally, they drank wine before they entered the Mikdash. And the same thing with Rabbi Bar Chana, it says he saw the people in the desert and they were drunk. They drank wine. And in truth, that's not what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is not saying literally that they drank wine before they entered Beit HaMikdash. If they would have done that, it wouldn't have been asur anyways, because it wasn't yet warned or prohibited at that point in time. But what was truly happening over here, and what the Gemara is saying about the 40 years in the desert, that Am Yisrael was lying on their backs, looking up, and they were drunk, that means to say that they never took their eyes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What the Gemara is highlighting, lying on their backs, facing Shamayim, that's to tell you that they were close with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They never took their eyes off the target. They were waiting and looking, how can I develop a relationship? But the yayin connotes something different, connotes something special. When a person's unhappy, a person's depressed, what does he do? He drinks wine and he becomes drunk. And that gives him a simcha. He forgets all about his worries. He forgets everything and he's in a different world, a euphoria that doesn't exist in the world as is. He's able to get away from it all. He's able to be very spiritual and forget about the physical world. But how long does that last? 2 hours later, maybe 6 hours later, he's back to everything. Everything hits him in a second. The concept of the wine is it elevates a person fast. It gets a person to a plateau very, very fast. But then it dies down because it's not genuine. It's not there. It's not real. And that's the concept shtuyei yain. It doesn't mean literally they drink the wine, but they went ahead and they brought themselves to a euphoria, to a closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that wasn't fully legitimate, that wasn't fully them. And they did it too fast, without a command from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without consulting with Moshe and Aaron. And that was the fatal error, the great mistake that they made. It makes sense that on Yom Kippurim, we look up to this action. Exactly, because this wasn't a sin, the type of the Yetzer Hara. This was a sin of trying to get too close, too fast with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a whole separate sin. That's a very different type of thing. That's a righteous sin, as you would say. It's a reason to mourn, and that's a perfect reason why on Yom Kippurim we read it. We don't read it on Rosh Chodesh Nisan when it actually happened. We read it on Yom Kippurim. Because what is Yom Kippurim? The whole day, the whole essence of the day is we're like angels. We have reached a plateau that's really not genuine if you think about it. Yom Kippurim is something else. Everybody could tell you that feeling of spirituality, of even though you didn't eat or drink, you're not focused on that. You're focused on tefillah, on I don't want this day to end. I want this relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu all year round. It's something very spiritual. It's something that exists on Yom Kippurim and then it dissipates. It disappears afterwards. It's like the shtuye yain. It's like that plateau. A person reaches it, but it's not really from work. It's just the circumstance brought him there. That's Yom Kippurim. So on this day, we can begin to understand what the chet of Nadav v'Avihu was, what their sin was. It wasn't something that we're used to. But on that day, you can relate to it, you can understand. And this is the time to glean that lesson of getting close with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but doing it naturally, doing it in the right way. Don't go ahead and put on the frock and the this and the that, and really not have the basics, where the person goes to the mikveh, but he's not focused on Ilchot Lashon Hara and Ilchot Shabbat. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu seeks of us. He wants us all to grow one step at a time, one level at a time. That's the lesson we can learn from Nadav v'Avihu, and Be'ezrat Hashem will merit to what the Zohar tells us, that a person who mourns and understands the tragic loss of these two individuals, that it was irreconcilable. It was something that was a loss forever, never to come back. Leaders, the next generation leaders, were gone from us. As we found also, tying it back to the Holocaust, where we lost many, many Gdolei Yisrael. It was a tragic time. It was something that one can never fully recover from. Impossible to recover from the loss of such great people. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman is one example of the amount of Torah that he was able to produce during his short lifetime. Could you imagine double, triple that amount, exponentially really, of Torah? And that's one individual. Forget everybody else in Am Yisrael. It's just a power that we lost in such a time. But we're able, Baruch Hashem, to come back and to grow and to thrive. And we never had as many yeshivot as we have today. And there's a lot of credit to be said for the generation of Am Yisrael that followed the Holocaust and that rebuilt what there is to rebuild. And that is the lesson of Nadav v'Avihu, to build and to build and to build and to strengthen ourselves with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amen ve'amen. Chazakim u'buchim.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.